So I just finished book one of George St-Pierre's The Way of the Fight, and these are going to be my notes and reflections. Book one is called Mother, Maman, and his whole, actually The Way of the Fight is broken up into 5 books, much like Musashi's The Book of Five Rings. And I didn't know what I was getting in store for after the introduction, but so far this first book seems to be, it's following now the linear kind of biographical sequence, and this section, Mother, Maman, takes you from George's infancy to about the age of 19, and you learn that he had he was born with skin problems, and this condition was exacerbated by weird habits that he had. He would lick his lips all the time and chew on his collar and this kind of thing. It reminded me of myself when I was a kid. You know, when I was young, I remember when I was playing baseball, I used to chew on my mitt, and my mitt was all chewed up. I would just stand in the outfield and chew on my mitt. But he would lick his lips. He's constantly licking his lips, and so he got, you know, he must have looked very strange around his lips from all the lip licking. And because of his strange appearance, kids started picking on him. Basically, he started being bullied, and he became a kid that was bullied quite often. And this bullying that he went through really would ultimately shape his life course. There's a lot that goes on in this chapter, you know, starting with the weird skin condition and the bullying, which is a theme throughout, you know, the whole thing. All his time growing up, this bullying is a part of it. You know, it's part of what compels him to start doing karate at like age 7. And his dad had already been doing karate for a while and had a black belt himself, but he started training George and then got him into it. George started doing karate, but you know, wasn't particularly, you know, great at it or anything. And he talks about losing a lot of fights in karate and all of this stuff. You know, in his young life, entering school and this kind of a thing, he's just getting picked on. He talks about how he starts getting his lunch money taken, and he wears these pants to school that are cool pants because they got buttons up the side, and so you can take them off. You know, they're athletic pants, and you can take them off really quick. You know, without having to pull them down, you can just rip them off. So the bullies are starting to rip off his pants as well as his money. But he continues to wear them, and he continues to kind of defy the bullies. In fact, there's times when he kind of, it's not like he's asking for it, but he gets himself into situations. Like he discusses an occasion in the winter when all these kids, not the kids on his block who are a little bit wimpier and nerdy and stuff, but on another block, these kids that are little tough kids are playing King of the Hill on a gigantic snow pile. And after watching from a distance for a while, George thinks he can, you know, it doesn't look too tough, and maybe he can play it. And so he starts playing, but being the new guy, you know, eventually, like, it's kind of a setup for somebody to mess with you. And some kid that got tired of George kind of pushing him so well asked George if he wants to fight, and George just thought he meant wrestling or something, you know, off the side of the mountain. So he's like, yes, and then right away the kid slugs him, so he got hurt. But from that, George learns a valuable lesson, and that is the element of surprise. And it's also an occasion that tips him off to one of these really important life lessons that the book covers, and that is that in this case, how he describes it is, losing is the only kind of thing that compels growth. I wouldn't call it losing. I would call it, making mistakes or something of this in this respect. But he's a competitor, so it's not surprising that he talks about it in terms of losing. But yeah, he says, that in this case, not being prepared for what was going to happen, for what might happen in this instance, he set himself up and got punched, and but from that he learned the element of surprise, and he's used that ever since, and he uses it now in his martial arts. So it was a good thing that this bad thing happened, and this is one of the big lessons, the kind of the themes that plays out throughout this chapter, is that these bad things that happen to him are only compelling him more toward greatness. Another kind of theme that plays out throughout the whole chapter that kind of is interwoven throughout is this adaptability and survival. He talks about dinosaurs, how he, from an early age and even today, has been fascinated with dinosaurs and the stories of dinosaurs, and how, because they are these, massive, most powerful creatures. But on the other hand, while he loves the dinosaurs, he finds far more inspiration in something like the cockroach, who's a true master of survival. And there's a whole page where he goes into detail about the biological tools that a cockroach has to survive all different and adapt to all different kind of situations fast, and how long they've been around and surviving. And he compares even the cockroach, and this I found kind of interesting, kind of funny, because I've seen people picking on that are trying to put mixed martial artists down, especially ground grapplers down, by pointing out that they're like a cockroach on their back. But in this chapter, George kind of compares Hoist Gracie, who's one of his heroes, to a cockroach. And because of his ability to adapt to whatever his challenger might be confronting him with. So yeah, it was kind of a nice turnaround to see somebody use that figure of the cockroach juxtaposed with jiu-jitsu as a what would you call it? As a compliment rather than an insult. So yeah, at some point, when you said around the age 13, he's tired of being bullied, and he decides to make a change, and the change is going to be that he is not ever going to back down to a fight again. This also happens to be that around the time that he gets his black belt. He got his first black belt at age 13. Now, I know some people won't agree with kids that young getting black belts, and personally, I don't really care. I know that I've seen enough to know that the black belts and a lot of what goes on today um, doesn't really mean that much other than you've put in your time. Much like university degrees are not really truly for academics anymore and scholars, they're just for people that go through the motions. But he did really go through it and got his black belt, went through the training. He almost quit at age 12, but his dad convinced him not to, told him you can quit when you're a black belt, you finish what you start. And he looks at that and he thinks, if he didn't go back to karate, if he had quit at that point, it would have meant that he wouldn't have become as successful as he's become. And so that was an important lesson that his dad taught him, that you start something and finish it and then you can quit. I don't know if I agree with that lesson, but in this circumstance it turned out good for him. He continued, he got his black belt, and at this point at age 13 he decides he's not going to get bullied anymore. He's not going to back down when he's being bullied, and before long he gets in a fight and he breaks a kid's arm. And so he felt bad about it afterwards, and he recognized that he had kind of become a very angry person because of all this bullying, and he was looking to outlet some of that anger, and this occasion arose. He accepted the fight. The kid was teasing him and he broke the kid's arm, and then he felt bad afterwards because he hurt the kid, and he also thought that he was going to be shunned socially for doing this, but it turned the other way around, where actually at that point he became the popular kid in school, and that made him even more upset because he realized that people didn't really like him for himself. They just liked him because he hurt somebody, and basically that means they liked him because they were afraid, and he thought that was very shallow. And so at this point he starts to withdraw from people. He doesn't think very highly of people, and he starts to be much more by himself, and he kind of immerses himself in training at his karate school and in his basement where his dad has some training facility, and he just spends a lot of time at home training, doesn't have much of a social life, and he does this from age 13 to 19, and at 19 he has a discovery, and that discovery is that he knows what he wants to be. He wants to be a world champion in mixed martial arts, and now he has his vision. So that was the first chapter, and I was a little surprised after reading the introduction that this first chapter would roll so linearly, but there's a couple of good lessons in there, at least lessons from George's perspective. And yeah, I think when you look at it and you look at these themes, survival through adaptability is a very important thing to keep in mind. And I don't know about not quitting something that you start, because sometimes you start something, you have one perception of what it's going to be, and as you get into it you learn that it's something else, and then you don't want to be doing it. Why stick around? I mean, in this case it really helped George, but I don't think it's absolutely a necessary thing. I think the best lesson from this first chapter is that mistakes are beneficial, that you shouldn't shy away from something that you're going to be making mistakes in, because you're afraid of making those mistakes, because it is in fact through making mistakes that you grow. If you don't encounter those mistakes, if you don't allow yourself to make those mistakes, and to lose and such. If you don't put yourself at that risk, then you don't learn where your deficiencies are and struggle to overcome them and become greater. And that, I think, is a really important lesson, and it's something that I've heard a lot of Blackfoot elders talk about. You know, it's okay to say, I made a mistake. But that, if you don't make mistakes, in fact, you're not going to learn. And so that message was something that was familiar to me and that I strongly agree with, and I think is probably the most important lesson to take away from this first book.